One thing that's really interesting about the opioids and the crack epidemic, both were fueled on racism. The opioids came about from doctors overprescribing to their white patients and underprescribing to the black. And the crack epidemic actually was the US government dropping the drugs into black communities across America. So racism fueled both the plague that we currently see now and the past crack epidemic. The politics of race and addiction, and believe me, it has everything to do with it. There's no way you can take racism out of both of these epidemics and plagues. There's no way. You would be dishonest if you said it had nothing to do with race. In October, Trump declared the opioid plague a national public health emergency. In a much publicized White House ceremony, nobody has seen anything like what's going on now, referring to the thousands of Americans overdosing each year from a class of narcotics that includes prescription painkillers, heroin, and fentanyl. But we have. Back in the 1980s and the early 1990s, the crack cocaine epidemic ravished poor Black communities across the country. Yes, that did happen, and it was the government that planted those drugs in the Black community. And this is why you killed Gary Webb when he brought all of that out. You said he committed suicide from 2 bullet wounds to the head. Yeah, right. When crack arrived in economically depressed urban areas, it proved both powerfully addictive and potentially lucrative. Violent turf wars erupt as dealers fought for control of the market, and the grip of addiction caught many people. The government's response, who started this epidemic, they had the nerve to crack down and throw people in jail for something they started. The government's response to the crack epidemic was to double down on the war on drugs, first declared by Richard Nixon in 1971. In 1986, Congress passed the infamous 100-to-1 sentencing law. See, that's all they did. Any law that was going to hurt us and throw us in jail and mass incarcerated, it's amazing. All these same people sitting their ass up in Congress was all for it, which treated possession of 1 gram of crack, not the sale, mind you, as the equivalent of possessing 100 grams of powder cocaine, which makes no sense whatsoever. This was on top of a 5-year mandatory minimum sentence for first-time possession of crack, which makes no sense whatsoever. But it's amazing how when the face turns white in the opioid epidemic, it makes no sense to have a war on drugs or mass incarcerate people. Now, all of a sudden, we shouldn't be doing that. See, this is why nobody is feeling you on your drug addicts falling. You're not getting the sympathy that you think. Since Black people accounted for 80% of crack arrests, Black communities were hardest hit by the ultra-criminalization of crack, which sent young Black men to prison at historic rates. And again, I said this before, I'm going to say it again, America has done absolutely nothing to right their wrong for the entire crack epidemic on the Black community. You've done nothing. And this is why I don't feel your pain on the opioid plague that's going on. The federal prison population swelled from 1985 to 2000, and two-thirds of those convictions were for drug offenses, and most of it was just possession, ladies and gentlemen. That's all it was. And they got people sitting in there with life sentences because of the three strikes you're out laws over a few ounces of crack cocaine. They have to spend the rest of their lives in jail. But according to them, it's a public health issue. You know, when the addiction suddenly hits a bunch of white people, it's public health and nobody should go to jail. Boy, I tell you, the hypocrisy is just unbelievable. Studies have shown that although Blacks are no more likely than whites to use illegal drugs, they are 6 to 10 times more likely to be incarcerated for drug offenses. That's why they stay in the Black community over policing it. See, and this is why you see the prisons for profit all over this country. So they need to pile the Black bodies in there to do their slave labor, because slavery has never gone anywhere in America. All right, this picture that you're looking at is from 1989, okay? And this is inside of a crack house where it was raided. So this is not a recent picture. Treatment of opioids. In contrast to the tough-on-crime response to the crack epidemic, which took its toll primarily on poor Black communities, the government response to the opioid crisis, in which more than 80% of overdose victims are white, has been wildly different, particularly in the way that elected officials and law enforcement talk about addiction. Yeah, they all have changed their minds. Congress, the Senate, the police departments, the judges, all of them have a change of heart all of a sudden. You think it might have something to do with these addicts look just like them? Oh, okay. When Trump declared the opioid plague a public health emergency, he talked about his brother who died from an alcohol addiction. Chris Christie, the New Jersey former governor who leads Trump opioid task force, also talked about losing a close friend to opioids. I wonder if he's still on that committee. He lost. Woo, he lost. Okay. Police departments across the country adopted treatment first policies that postpone or forewent criminal prosecutions for opioid possessions and diverted drug offenders to treatment programs. Police officers in the small town of Laconia, New Hampshire, a state hit particularly hard by overdose deaths, carry business cards that read, "The Laconia Police Department recognize that substance misuse is a disease." Really? Well, when they were dealing with Black people, they kicked in the door, handcuffed everybody in the house. There could have been people in the house that had nothing to do with crack. It was some crackhead that went home and had some crack on them. And everybody in the whole house was put in prison over that one person. But now it's a disease. Oh, wow. Oh, wow, y'all. It's a disease. We understand you can't fight this alone. Oh, they have that on business cards and they're handing it to the addict. Wow. How compassionate. It's a shame all of that compassion didn't exist during the crack epidemic. It's amazing how it just all of a sudden appears now. One reason that most opioid addicts are white could be because they are more likely to be prescribed pain medication. Oh yeah, they are. They had much more than black people did. One study showed that doctors are less likely to prescribe pain medication for their black patients, believing falsely that they had a higher pain threshold. Didn't I tell you that? That comes from slavery, ladies and gentlemen. That comes from slavery. How did we get to an opioid plague? I'm going to go ahead and play this video.
In the 80s, pain was one of the fifth criteria of wellness. What was your pain level? The Veterans Administration at that time started evaluating pain in people in the service, military, and then Purdue Pharma comes out with a miracle drug called Oxycontin. It's supposed to give you 24-hour relief, one pill, no addiction. And the FDA approved it. So we have a pharmaceutical company, brand name, very well respected. We have the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, who's supposed to be looking out for our welfare. And then we have our doctors prescribing it at unprecedented amounts because they thought it was a new miracle drug, if you will. But before you knew it, we had the genie was out of the box. And then it just exploded. And then basically, I believe it became a business model. I believe there's a lot of people who are culprits here that basically have responsibility for what's been done to society, knowing they put a product out there that could do and what it has done, destroyed lives and taken lives. We've lost 200,000 Americans since 1999. 200,000. In the state of West Virginia, 1,800,000 people. I lost 630 people last year. More people died of legal prescription drug overdoses than anything else in my state. So this is an epidemic. And we talk about Zika, we talk about Ebola, we talk about all these things that we should be very much concerned about. We get very few people talking about opiate addictions.
Well, that's because, they tried to keep this hidden for a long time, but they pretty much bit off their own foot by doing that and continue to do so. This is not heavily in mainstream media at all. Okay. All right, let me just go down a bit. Much was made during the 2016 presidential campaign about the economic toll of globalization on rural, mostly white communities, and how the ensuing joblessness and hopelessness helped to fuel the opioid plague. A New York-based journalist who has written extensively about addiction, wonders why the same connections weren't drawn between economic depression and drug use in the Black community because of racism. America's the very same people that are racist are the government. There's really no distinction. It's really one of the same. That's why there was no concern. And there's still no concern for the crack addicts that are sitting in prison now for a few decades. And like I said, America has a history of never righting their wrongs. You just go on and act like it never happened. And that's going to be your downfall. The reason we saw crack hit Black neighborhoods the way it did in the 80s and 90s was because they had high unemployment levels and were hit hard by deindustrialization. Yeah, but you keep conveniently leaving out it was the US government that's largely responsible for dropping that crack cocaine in the neighborhood. Nobody was looking for crack cocaine. It was forced upon the Black community. All the same things we're seeing in white communities now. Okay, how the addiction started for white people and how it started for Blacks really is different. You know, um, again, y'all voluntarily went to your doctor, and many of you asked for that pain medication. We didn't get an opportunity to ask for crack cocaine. It was forced on us. And that's how you mastermind a way to start the war on drugs. You got the Black community addicted to drugs, and then you declared a war on drugs. That's what you did. That's exactly what this government did. The reason we saw crack hit Black neighborhoods the way it did, now they're talking about high unemployment, all the same things we're seeing in rural white communities now. Let me go down. If you ask me, I do think if you change the race of the victims, will our sympathies change? Yes, it would. If Black people was going through the opioid plague that you see now, y'all would still want everybody rounded up and jailed. Yes, I have to say yes. Yeah, and I have to say yes too. It makes a hell of a difference. They wouldn't give a shit if the Black community was dying in high numbers from opioids. They would ignore it. They would demand that you go to jail. They would be complaining about seeing you on the streets. Oh, they'll be playing the whole thing up big time. But now that it's affecting them, they want sympathy from everybody. I tell you, the hypocrisy just never fails to amaze me. And remember, they gave our babies a nickname back during that time. They called them crack babies. They gladly called Black babies crack babies. The crack baby panic of the 1980s was sparked by one preliminary study of just 23 infants and led to predictions that an entire generation would grow up to sickly brain damage and heavily dependent on social services. Longitudinal studies have since exposed the crack baby myth, showing that full-term babies born to crack-addicted mothers showed no health differences compared to their peers. All right, y'all. Please tell me what you think, ladies and gentlemen. Please leave your comment and subscribe. And don't forget to hit on that notification bell for my next video. Peace, family.